Learning objectives. After completing this module, learners will be able to understand the nature and scopes of socialist patterns in Soviet system, learn about the drawbacks of bureaucracy in Soviet era, understand the salient points as responsible for the collapse of USSR and the other Soviet bloc countries, learn about the series of events as taken place after the collapse of USSR, understand the Gorbachev's regime and the contemporary situations as emerged during the period, learn about the economic, political and administrative stagnancies that led to the disintegration, understand the concept of shock therapy during post-communist regime, learn about the courses of shift towards capitalism after the end of bipolarity, understand the drastic changes in external orientations and interrelation of trade and development, understand the consequences of shock therapy during the post-communist regime, learn about the increasing inequality and economic discrimination between the Western and post-Soviet blocs, learn about the tensions and conflicts in relation with secessionism in several former Soviet republics, understand India's relation with post-communist countries. What was the Soviet system? Formation of Soviet system and the USSR. Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. After the Great Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic was formed, where the society and governance of the country was intended to be built under the ideals of equality and the private ownership over lands and other factories, mines, and else was abolished. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, popularly known as Lenin, led the struggle and took a prominent role after structuring the nation post-revolution, theorizing for the first time in the world the Marxist concept of socialism and communism in reality. Soviet Republic. Emergence after Second World War. After Second World War, Soviet Army liberated number of East European countries from fascist rule, and they eventually took the Soviet model of administration in their countries. By the Warsaw Pact in May 1955, they came together and formed the Second World countries during Cold War period. After Second World War, Soviet Union made himself stronger in defense along with its highly developed nuclear weapons. The country's vast energy resources like oil, iron and steel, and the developed transport system in order to reach the remote area of the land made the country stronger in comparison with other countries except United States. During Soviet rule, the domestic production was enormously increased, and due to its principle of socialist nature of administration, state ownership was dominant over every land and each of productive assets of the country. Authoritarian and bureaucratic Soviet system and its ill effects. Soviet regime did not allow individual freedom and freedom of speech in general. The one-party rule refused other democratic aspirations in the country. Several people, having been aware about other capitalist nations and their people, were increasingly unhappy. Additionally, in the arms race with US and capitalist bloc, the USSR more and more engaged in military expansion and did not take care about the social and economic development of the citizen of the country. Gorbachev's regime and the disintegration of Soviet Republic. The regime of Gorbachev. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the General Secretary of the Communist Party, and tried to introduce many reforms in the systems. He introduced perestroika, which meant resurrection, and glasnost, which meant open air. He tried highly to normalize the relations with West and US and give more democratic rights to the citizens in the country. Gorbachev appointed Boris Yeltsin as the head of Communist Party of Moscow and initiated number of reforms in the country. In October 1989, Soviet Union declared that Warsaw Pact members being free to take their own decisions. In the meantime, the liberation movement in order to leave the Soviet Republic was spread in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia in 1988. Disappointment grew against Gorbachev. Despite several attempts, the dissatisfaction grew against Gorbachev internally in Soviet Republic. Many people thought he intentionally was very slow to bring out the reforms which were very important at that time. Other hardliners of the Communist Party were enraged as they were finding themselves in gradually loosening party dominance unlike previous era. Even the supporters of Gorbachev were also disillusioned about him, as it seemed to them that he was not able to defend his own policies in strict order decisively. Declaration of final disintegration of USSR. In June 1990, Russian Parliament, Duma, announced itself that it would be no longer associated with Soviet Union. And finally, along with Belarus and Ukraine, Russia announced to reject the Pact of 1922, and thus USSR's existence went in peril. In December 1991, Russia, Belarus and Ukraine determined to negate the 1922's Soviet Treaty to build the USSR and thus established the Commonwealth of Independent States (CIS), where Armenia, Azerbaijan, Moldova, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Georgia in 1933, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan joined the CIS. Causes and consequences of disintegration of Soviet Republic. Many historians say that the political and economic institutions of Soviet era were utterly failed to meet the aspirations of the people. Economic stagnation barred the growth of the people, and many of them started to question about the eligibility of the system openly. Soviet system became highly dependent on maintaining the nuclear arsenals and to retain the satellite states in Eastern Europe and in Asia. The lives of ordinary people did not see any sustained development in this regard. Nationalist feelings and the desire of sovereignty within various republics. Many East European states like Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, and in other Baltic states, the urge of nationalism was arisen, for which in every state level they wanted freedom and sovereignty of their states. Eventually, every new states after getting their freedom from Soviet Republic willingly joined North Atlantic Treaty Organization Pact, NATO Pact, along with other capitalist Western countries. Consequences of disintegration of Soviet states. The ideological disputes were ended and socialist bloc ended their struggle against the capitalism, which brought possible ending of arms struggle in world. In world politics, the bipolar system found an end and the new international system of multipolarity was appeared, where many international players would come. Eventually, the US approached as a superpower with the idea of capitalism and liberal democracy in the world. Shock therapy by IMF and World Bank in Russia and East European countries. The model of transitions as brought by the International Monetary Fund IMF or World Bank for Russia, Eastern European countries and other erstwhile Second World countries was different, but its direction and nature was quite similar. Everything which was controlled by the government in Soviet era was to be transformed into private ownership, and the phases of transformation were so crucial and painstaking. In agriculture, the collective farms needed to be changed into private ownership, and no other medium way out was granted in this phase. The direct link-up of post-Soviet bloc countries with West through various organizations and monetary institutions, the pathway of capitalism into those countries were broadened. Tension and conflicts in post-communist Russia and Eastern Europe. In Russia, two republics like Chechnya and Dagestan were emerged, where the Chechnya was demanding their independence from Russian rule. Russia was very dominant to suppress the Chechen rebels, with many incidents of firing and military operations. In Eastern Europe after 1991, the Czechoslovakia was broken apart into two nations, Czechs and Slovaks. But in Balkan Republic, in Yugoslavia, the matter was different. Majority of Serbian people did not obey the demand of independence of Bosnia. The bloodshed struggle in these inter-ethnic civil war left unforgettable scars in the history of these states. In Tajikistan, the civil war went for more than 10 years after 1991. In Azerbaijan, Armenian secessionists tried to divide the region. In other places like Georgia, Kyrgyzstan and Ukraine, the revolts and rebels were commenced. Summary. Let us summarize what we have learnt. The collapse of the Berlin Wall of the Second World led to the end of prevailing Cold War. The revolution of 1917, as inspired by socialism, was intended to establish an egalitarian society in Russia. Main features of Soviet or communist political system were dictatorship of the Communist Party, hold of the bureaucracy, and negation of personal rights and civil liberties. Communist Party and its related bureaucracy had weakened the democratic character of the central legislature and the fair administrative policies as undertaken in Soviet republics. Through Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika, he laid the stress on political economy and administrative reforms. After the resignation of Gorbachev as President of the Soviet Union in December 25, 1991, the Socialist Republic went out of existence. Some of the causes of Soviet disintegration were negation of political democracy, economic stagnancy, militarism, Gorbachev's policies, increasing national aspirations from different Union republics, etc. The major consequences of Soviet disintegration are the end of bipolarity and the emergence of US as sole superpower in the world. Russia was to be transformed economically and politically, which caused a great upheaval as being called shock therapy. Russia gave India financial assistance as well as engineering and machinery support in order to set up the steel plants in the country. Supported on the Kashmir issue, the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation helped our country during Bangladesh crisis. India's films and Hindi songs were so popular in erstwhile Soviet Union and present Russia and other countries.